play country music. Need to slow that guitar down. Tell us about the tear in your beer. Your woman done you wrong. I like that one about the day when your girlfriend met your wife, or how that biker dude almost.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Cliff Bauman coming to you in my basement here doing my first podcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is going to be a very special time for me to go on and talk about what it means to be a mental health warrior and how I got to where I am today. That path that I've taken has been a long road. But as a lot of us, our veterans out there are hurting and suffering with everything going on. And I just want to, with this podcast, I just want to talk about my story of hope and what I've done in my path to becoming a mental health warrior. And maybe some of those who are listening can relate to what I went through and maybe find hope in that, and then be able and be brave and ask for help when I was having my issue. Today's an important day for me, December 20th, and that's why I chose today to be the first day to start my podcast. 19 years ago today on this date, I was alone in my brother's house there in Kansas City, dealing with a lot of guilt. I was at the Pentagon on 9/11 and all the things that I saw and did. And I was sitting in a room and it was dark, much like this one is if I turned the lights down. And I was just sitting there and I was in my thoughts. And earlier in that day, I'd already decided that I didn't want to live anymore. And I got a piece of tissue paper and I just wrote a simple note. I'm going to write that right here. I had this note for a lot of years, but I lost it moving around in the military. I know it's kind of hard to read, but I'll read it. I said, I don't want to live with the guilt of not finding anybody alive anymore. I just can't handle it. And then I said, I love you all. And I set it down on the table. Took 22 sleeping pills. And I lay down as I'm drifting off. My mind just starts to wander as the effects of the sleeping pills start taking effect. One thing I want to talk about is, as I'm laying there thinking about that, I'm thinking about what went on in my life and how did I get there? And so I want to talk about now is how did I go from this happy-go-lucky guy who joined the military in 1987 to in 2002, December 20th, I'm laying on the couch in my brother's house, very close to death. My life started out in Kansas City, Missouri. I grew up, I was born in Kansas City on January 24th, 1970. It's kind of funny. My grandfather talks about, my mom had a terrible, I was number 4 or 5 kids, and she just had a terrible time giving birth to me. And it went on for like 13 hours, 14 hours. And it's funny, my grandfather always told me, he's like, when you came out and everything was all said and done, he says, all you did was take a big yawn. You saw these big blue eyes and white hair and just smiled, and then you went to sleep. And so that they teased me about that for a lot of years. But, growing up as a kid, our life was pretty normal. We grew up in a lower middle class, mostly probably closer to poor, but we didn't know we were poor. If you look at the pictures that I'm showing, you can see there as us as kids growing up, I had, really white hair or blonde hair. And for the most part, we were a really close knit family. We lived in Kansas City for a while, but then when I was young, we moved down south to a small town called Aurora, Missouri. And that's where I spent pretty much from second grade until I left in 2000 and went to work in the National Guard Bureau. Growing up in Aurora, in a small town, was fun. We lived on a farm out south of town. We had a lot of fun. We enjoyed, all the times as a family. We hunted, we fished. We always had, pets at the house, and always enjoyed having different pets. And I kind of want to tell the story, and I'm telling the story for Vincent and Claudio if you're watching. My older brother always raised all kinds of chickens and animals, and we did a lot of coon hunting stuff. And one of our coon dogs had gotten lost. And in the process of getting lost, we didn't find a coon dog for a couple of days. And so by the time we had found her, apparently she was in heat, and she had mated, and she had pups, but the pups were mixed. They weren't, purebred coon dogs, red bone actually. And so, the dogs for us wasn't worth anything. So my brother had found this guy that had a couple of chickens, and he had this baby vulture. And so we traded in those coon dogs for these chickens and vultures. And we actually hand raised this vulture, and his name was Baby. And you see the pictures there. Well, Baby used to perch on top of our house at night. And it's funny to watch the cars drive by, because they would slow down. They would see this vulture up on top of the house. But us kids would come out in the morning, and we'd go outside, and Baby would fly down and be in the yard, and he would play with us all the time. And I had these pair of white tennis shoes, and he didn't really particularly like my white tennis shoes. I don't know why, but if you look at that picture, you see them, he's pecking at my tennis shoes. And it was funny. We'd go down to the creek fishing and swimming or whatever. And Baby would follow us down, and he would circle above us or land in a tree while we were swimming or mess around at the creek. And then we went back home, he'd fly back home. But one thing that he used to do, and it used to drive my brother crazy and my family, and they'll get a kick out of this watching, is he would land on top of our chicken coop. And as the chickens would come out into the yard, it was fenced. He would swoop down at them, and they would run back in, and he'd go back up and land up. And he'd do this for hours, tease them. And so we had to teach him how to not to do that, because the age production of the chickens kept going down. So it was quite funny. Growing as a kid in a small town, I took to sports. I enjoyed wrestling. Wrestling meant a lot to me. I wrestled from age 5, and then wrestled some in college. I really enjoyed it. I had, a wrestling club there, and a lot of us, because we're all from the same community, wrestled from the time we were 5, 6 years old all the way through high school. And I remember we had this one kid, his name was Joe Crabtree, and he was a good wrestler, and he really pushed me to be a much better wrestler as we was moving through school. But I had a good friend of mine, Todd, and you heard the song in the beginning, and I'll talk more about him at the end. We were friends in high school, and Todd joined the Guard actually before I did, about 3 months. And he actually convinced me that I needed to join the National Guard. And so at age 17, I convinced my parents that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to join the National Guard. And then we went and, I joined the Guard. And it was kind of funny, because the armory for where we drilled at was right across the street from the high school. So it was kind of funny that you just go across the street, and then you have drill on the weekends there. But it was very interesting. My time in Aurora was great. Going through high school, I broke, my older brother wrestled. He's 4 years older. I broke most of his records. Shout out, Chris. But we were happy, go lucky family. We were, like I said, we were poor. We didn't have much to go on, but we just enjoyed life. We enjoyed being around each other, and it was just a lot of fun. And, there's this one kid that I wrestled in school, and his name was Scott, and he was 2 years older than me. And he was from a different school. And when we would wrestle, I could never beat him. I almost beat him my sophomore year, which was his senior year. And then he graduated, and I didn't see him for 2 years. Well, like I said early on, I joined the National Guard in 1987 in March. And then in June that year, I left to go to basic training. And I'm on the bus going to Fort Leonard Wood. And Todd's actually on the bus, my friend. And the friend of mine who I wrestled got on the bus. I hadn't seen him for 2 years. And I was like, hey, don't I know you? And we've been friends ever since. We wound up going basic training together. And he was in the Guard for 6 years, got out, joined the Navy, became a SEAL, and was a SEAL for 20 plus years. Has since now retired. But, going through the National Guard and going through that part of my life, as a young teenager, kind of really helped shape me. I was kind of a troublemaker, and we used to run around and and have a lot of fun. Me and Todd and Mike, and we just enjoyed being teenagers in a small town, right? We did all kinds of mischief. I remember one story, and I'm only going to tell a couple of them, but Todd had just gotten this new Chevy pickup truck, and it kind of rained that spring. And so we decided to, go out and take a trip. It was late at night, it was on the weekend, and we're just driving down the country roads, and they're kind of curvy and whatever. And we had our buddy Rick with us, and Todd's like, "Hey, Rick, see how well my truck corners?" And as he goes around a corner, I had enough time to say "la," and he drove it right into the lake. Luckily, we were able to get the truck back out of the lake. But that was a lot of fun. If you look up in one of the pictures there is when I graduated basic training, and one of the guys standing there was Mike Sutherland. And me and Mike ran around a lot. He was a big kid in school. He's, I think, one of the first kids to bench press 300 there at our school. And him and I always had a great time running together. He was way bigger than I was. I was 119 pounds in school. And we just had a lot of fun. And I just really enjoyed life, and things were going well. I was in, Aurora up until 2000, where I got a phone call to come and go work at National Guard Bureau on an ADOS tour. And if you don't know what that is, that's just active duty special work. And you go there for a short amount of time, and then you work usually a year, and then after that you return home. So it was at that time that I accepted the job and left. It would have been September of 2000. I took that job, left, and went out to National Guard Bureau. And it's kind of funny. So here I am in my red pickup truck, leaving a town of 6,000 people and driving to Washington, D.C., which I'd never been before. And so as I get into Washington, D.C., I reported to Fort McNair there just across the 14th Street Bridge, and it was, 11 o'clock at night. And of course, I had no idea where I was at. And if anybody knows that's been up in that area, it's a little bit different now because of the baseball stadium, but back in 2000, it was completely different. It's a pretty rough neighborhood. And so I go and I unload my stuff in the hotel, and, I go ask the gate guard, I said, "Hey, where's a good place I want to grab a bite to eat? I'm hungry." And he's like, "Oh, well, if you go down a couple of blocks and turn left and go up on top of the hill, there's a Taco Bell there, and you can get something to eat and come back." I said, "Okay, great." Now, mind you, I'm in a GMC Sonoma 4-wheel drive pickup truck with big tires, Missouri plates, and it's red. And as I'm driving, I leave Fort McNair and I'm driving up the street. You kind of get that feeling when you're not in such a great neighborhood, right? And so I get at the Taco Bell. I've never seen bulletproof glass so thick in my life at that point in my life. And I pull up to the window, and there's like the bulletproof glass, like 4 inches thick. And there's like a little bitty hole just big enough to pass some money through and get your food. And as I'm getting my food and, putting it in the truck, a car in front of me comes screaming around. There's a 7-Eleven next to the Taco Bell. It comes screaming around. There's another car behind it. The guy in the first car jumps out. The 2 guys in the back car shoots the guy, and then they take off. And so I'm not in DC, not even an hour, and I saw my first attempted murder. And so that was crazy. So I get back to the base, and the next morning I'm getting gas at the gas station, and the little old lady at the gas station, it was so funny. I was telling her the story. And she's like, "Oh, honey, you never go right out of the gate after dark." So I thought that I'd go find that security guard and drag him out back for that. But that was a lot of fun. And working at National Guard Bureau, I had a great time and really enjoyed it. And as I went down through the path of everything leading up to 9/11, and I look back at my life, and everything was, it was pretty normal. I had normal relationships where you were with somebody and then you broke up, or, I had friends that we were really close with, and then we wasn't, and we're close again. And things were pretty normal on a pretty even path. And so so as I go out and I talk and I'm doing this podcast, and it's my first one I've done, and I'm really trying to tell, how I came from and what my life was before December 20th, 2002. And I kind of shared some of my stories of my childhood, and my childhood was happy. I have no complaints. We were poor, didn't know we were poor. My military career up until that point in the National Guard was fine. We used to go to Germany, and we'd run around Germany for annual training for 3 weeks, and that was great fun. And I became a master fitness trainer in the Army as an E6, and then from there I became a warrant officer, and I was actually a warrant officer when I CW2 when I left and went to National Guard Bureau to work, in Washington D.C. or in Arlington actually. And my life leading up to 9/11 was pretty good. It wasn't extraordinary. I talk about this all the time when I do my speaking events. My life isn't so extraordinary that it couldn't happen to anybody listening here. And so I remember, everybody remembers what they were doing on 9/11, right? Everybody does. Everybody remembers what they were doing when the first plane hit the tower, when the second plane hit the tower, when, the plane hit the Pentagon. And, one thing I want to talk about before I dive deeper into what is really what I'll talk about, what it means to be a mental health warrior, is some of the things I talk about, I'm very open and honest, and it may be a trigger for some of you listening out here. But just know if you're having issues or problems, be sure and pick up and call the Veterans Crisis Line at any time, or phone a buddy, or call 911. Just know that we all love you. We want you here, and we want you to see tomorrow. And I'll just say that before I go into my story a little bit about 9/11 and how I wound up at my brother's house, December 20th. I remember the morning of 9/11, I got into work, and I worked in the automation information system division there in the JP1. They called it Jefferson Plaza 1 in Arlington. And so in the Guard Bureau, we were in Arlington because at that time they were renovating the Pentagon. So the Guard was the first to leave and the last to go back into the spaces that they were fixing. And so I'm there in Crystal City, and my boss, who was an Air Force colonel, never came into work late that morning. And I don't know if he was watching the events that unfolded in New York, and that's why he was late, but he was late coming into work. And we were scheduled to be over at the Pentagon to hook up some equipment, some telephone equipment there where the swing space was for our generals. And it just happened to be the spot right where the plane hit. And so he comes in late. I give him the morning report, what's all going on. And then me and E6, we leave from there, and we start, walking over to the Pentagon. And we got, it was maybe 4 or 5 blocks away that walk was. That morning it was, it was a typical September weather morning for Virginia. It wasn't too hot or too cold. And as we're walking over there, that's when the plane hit. And when it hit, I mean, you felt the concussion of the explosion. And the E6 that was with me, I sent him back to the building, and then I moved forward and started the search and rescue from there. And, it was just all mayhem there. As you can imagine, everybody saw it on the news where people running around trying to help, and people confused and disbelief and not really understanding what really had just, transpired. And I would stay there on the 9/11 for about 6 hours the first day. Was there assisting and everything. And then I was command directed back to go to the building. I guess do accountability or whatever. And it was at that time when I got back to the building that I had a good friend of mine that worked for AT&T at the time. His name was Bob. And so I called him on the phone, and he actually had an idea of using a spectrum analyzer to pick up cell phone frequencies. If anybody was buried in the rubble and they had the cell phone with them, then we could try to locate them. And so it was early morning of the 12th. We went back down to the site, and it's kind of funny is we had no reason to be down there other than his truck said AT&T disaster recovery. And, Bob always will talk about, he's amazed how well I was able to BS my way to get through security to get on site. And so we were able to get on site. And once on site, we started doing our search areas. We got linked up with a guy named John. I don't think that was his real name. And we started working our way around the Pentagon, looking at different things and starting, to search areas. And so picture this, it was me and Bob, and then my good friend Jack had come down, and we would carry a generator, the analyzer, and we would have to move this to have power to do the analyzer. And then once we got a signal, I didn't have a family, I didn't have children at that time. Once we got a signal, then I would go inside the Pentagon and then try to retrieve something if it was there or not there. If it was a cell phone was attached to somebody. We were able to retrieve, I think it was 6 or 8 cell phones from victims of the 9/11 attack, but everybody that we found, they were deceased. We didn't find anybody alive. And so, as we continued the search and the day wears on, the Pentagon kept catching fire because the way that the slate roof was built on it. And so we'd do searches and we'd have to step out for a while while they put the fire out, and we'd go back in. And I remember it was getting kind of late on the 12th, and all of the command groups started setting up, the FBI Command Center, NTSB, and all of them were setting up their command areas because they're getting ready to start the investigation or be able to go in the Pentagon and look at things. And we just started doing a search. We came out and we went over to the NTSB huddle because I was aviation, and I knew that those airplanes have black boxes and they ping when they hit water, but I had no idea how much water they had to be in to ping. And so I went over there, I asked who the ground commander was at that time, and it was a young lady, and she came up, and I was asked her a question. I said, so how much water does that black box have to be in to start pinging? And she thought, well, usually 18 inches, 2 feet of water. And I said, well, I just came out from the Pentagon. There's places in there where there's 3 feet of water. And it was interesting. She said they didn't have the equipment out there on site to pick up that ping, but they should probably get it out there. And I think they brought it out there, and I think 24 hours they found the black box in the plane, which is pretty incredible. Probably got her promoted and didn't know it. But I remember we had just got done talking to her, and then me and Bob had moved back into the Pentagon. And I don't know if you know how the Pentagon works. There's different rings as you work your way to the center of the Pentagon. And then we were in between C, which is the last, and B, which is the first part of the inner corridor. And that's the part where when the plane hit, the nose detached and acted like a missile going through there. That's why you saw the half circle of the Pentagon. And of course, all kinds of stuff was blown through there. And by stuff, you can use your imagination. And so we had just came around the corner. We got set up. I'd now been on site for 10 hours. Bob and I had been, and we just got another signal. And so I moved my way in to try to retrieve the cell phone, and he would stay out. And the reason we did that, because if the building collapsed, he could at least tell somebody where I was at for them to come in and try to rescue me if the building collapsed. And so we get in there, retrieve the cell phone, we come back out. And I remember as I come out of the Pentagon, out of the section there I just talked about, there's a whole bunch of water, and the lady's purse was laying in the water. And I didn't want it to be ruined. It was having a profound effect on me already. And so I picked up her purse and I set it up on a ledge there because in my mind, I didn't want to get ruined further, and I wanted the families to have that back. And I remember as I picked it up and kind of gathered the things that had fallen out of it to set up on this piece of equipment, 2 FBI agents were walking down the corridor, and they started yelling at me, "Hey, don't be disturbing evidence." I don't, to be honest with you, I have no idea what they said to me. But I just turned around and completely went the F off on them. I was like, fuck you, fuck this. I've been here doing this, blah, blah, blah. I'm covered in blood and crap and shit and whatever. And they got clean suits on, and I wasn't going to tolerate it. And I just started screaming, and I lost it. And Bob tried to calm me down, and they just tried to walk off. I guess they just didn't want to deal with me, and we continued our work. And it, got to be really early morning of the 13th. They had just taken the bodies out of the Pentagon. We were getting ready to leave to go home. And we get to the house, we get ready to leave, and John takes us in to the FBI Mobile Command Center, because in case we come back down on site, he doesn't want anybody to mess with this or tell him what we were doing. A couple of times the NSA had come down and tried to arrest us because they didn't know what we were picking up with our equipment and things like that. And so we wrote our name on the FBI Command Center. And the first time I wrote my name, I wrote Red Dog because my first name's Clifford, right? And they didn't think that was funny, but I got a kick out of it. So we wrote our names on the board. But I also remember too, and I thought about this just now, and I should have said it earlier, is that if you ever saw a scanned out picture of the Pentagon because we knew President Bush was going to come down and visit. But if you ever saw a scanned out picture when they dropped the flag off the side of the Pentagon, and then you had that big beam at front that collapsed, there's actually two guys standing on the rubble, and that's me and Bob. And we had just gotten a signal. I was getting ready to go in to read this, to do the cell phone. We didn't know what was going on. We just heard the flag drop and people cheer and carry on. And then so we just continued working. And so we get to the FBI command lab, and I erased the red dog because they didn't get kicked out of that, but I thought it was funny. And we left the scene, and I went home. Sorry. Yeah, it's the first time I really had a chance to think about what I saw and done for the last, close to 48 plus hours. I called my family. They had no idea if I was alive or dead. They hadn't heard from me since 9/11. This is now the 13th, almost 2 days later. And I remember getting in the shower, and first of all, I took my hat, boots, and gloves off, and I put them in a box, and they remained in the box for a long time. And I'll talk about that later in the next podcast. And I took my uniform off. I threw it in the wash, and I get in the shower. And in the shower is the first time that I just kind of got emotional and broke down. I lived by myself, and in DC, I didn't have anybody there. And I just remember just being overly emotional in the shower, and then, going to sleep that night as much as I could sleep. I don't think I slept much. And then I got up the next morning and went to work and went on with my life. And that's pretty much how things went until a year after 9/11. And so I think I want to thank everybody for watching the podcast today. I hope you enjoyed me talking a little bit about my story and kind of what I went through, kind of how I got to be a mental health warrior a little bit. And I'll go more into detail about that on the next podcast. But I want to say that, it's a process, right? Everything that I went through and then that I dealt with that led up to my attempt on December 20th was a process. And I'll talk more about that process on my next podcast. And so it's really important to remember that, we all have issues and problems in our life. It's coming up on Christmas in 5 days. You may be home, you may not be home. You may have family, you may not have family. I know it's a stressful time for everybody. But, just please take that time to reach out to somebody who maybe you haven't talked to for a while, or maybe be feeling down or something, and just see how they're doing, because a text message or a kind word can go so far in somebody's life. And so tonight I want to end with really a couple of things. One, thanks for watching and listening to me ramble on about my story and kind of how I became a mental health warrior. I want to thank all the veteran trash talkers out there that are listening in tonight to learn a little bit more about the new member of the team. But also I want to talk about my buddy Todd, who you heard his music a little bit in the beginning, and you'll hear it again when I finish up talking. Todd was a good friend of mine. I've known him for 30 plus years. We're just deer hunting with him this past couple of weeks ago. Actually, I was down at his place, deer hunting in Missouri. And Todd had a rough time in Iraq. He had a lot of PTSD issues, and he was there at at a veterans center and there in Missouri, and went and learned how to deal with his PTSD through music. And I think that's a great thing. Is one people ask all the time. When you have post-traumatic stress syndrome, how do you deal with the triggers? And one thing about being a mental health warrior is you have to learn how to deal with your triggers differently, right? So I have, obviously, 9/11 is a trigger for me. October 3rd, 2009 is a trigger for me. I'll talk more about that later on my podcast, where I jumped in the water and saved 3 fishermen on a boating accident. Saved 3 out of 4 fishermen, actually. And then, December 20th, which is today, the day that I'm talking about this. But anyway, so Todd was there, and the guy was teaching guitar lessons, and Todd knew nothing about guitar or music or anything. And so he learned through music as one of his coping mechanisms for his PTSD. He has no professional training. He writes whatever he feels in his heart and wrote it down. And so when I decided to start doing this podcast, I thought, what a great thing to have a veteran or somebody out there who, you don't have to be a veteran. If you're dealing with PTSD issues or mental health issues, and you found that music is a way for you to relieve that stress or deal with those PTSD when those triggers come up, send me your music. If it's 100% written by you and it's all copyrighted by you, I'll pick through songs and play them in the beginning and the end of each episode that I do, because I think it's a really awesome thing. I want to say thank you to Todd for sharing his music with me to allow to play on my first podcast. And I want to thank all of you for listening in. I want you all to have a great evening, have a great week, and take care. God bless.
You wanna play country music, need to slow that guitar down. Tell us about the tear in your beer, your woman done you wrong. I like that one about the day when your girlfriend met your wife, or how that biker dude almost took your life. I like blue eyes crying in the rain, stuck in folks in prison listening to a train. Who's gonna fill their shoes? And a boy named Sue. How much a cowboy hat means to you. Walking on the fighting side of me. How much you miss old Bobby McGee. You wanna play country music, you need to slow that guitar down. Tell us about the tear in your beer, how your woman done you wrong. I like that one about the day when your girlfriend met your wife, or how that biker dude almost took your life. Hopping on the bus, get on the road again. I'm going out drinking with all my rowdy friends. Walk the streets of Bakersfield, Pappy brewed white lightning in the hills. No got me honky-tonk angels, picking, dueling banjos, guitars and Cadillacs, man up front dressed in black. You wanna play country music, you need to slow that guitar down. Tell us about the tear in your beer, how your woman did you wrong, or how much you miss old Johnny Cash. And if that ain't country, I kiss your ass.